There is a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when you realize that your life has been shaped far more by the identity you've been carrying than by the desires you've been asking for. And as you sit here now, listening, you can feel that truth stirring somewhere inside you, not as pressure, not as demand, but as recognition. A soft, steady whisper that says, you've been trying to receive money from the perspective of someone who doesn't believe it belongs to them. Let that land without resistance. Let it breathe inside you. Because what we begin here is not a lesson about money. It is a gentle return to the self who already lives beyond financial fear. A return to the one who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't wait. The one who simply exists in the end of what they want and allows the world to arrange itself around that inner certainty. Notice your breath for a moment, not to control it, but to witness it. This breath is the evidence that life moves toward you without your effort. Money, too, responds in this way. Not to tension, not to wanting, but to identity. Neville Goddard called it the assumption of the end. Not a technique, not a wish, a posture, a state of being so complete that the imagination becomes more real than the circumstances. And yet most people approach money from the ache of lack, from the urgency of "I need this," from the silent trembling that comes when you look at your account and feel your stomach tighten. Not because you are failing, but because no one ever taught you that wanting money is not the same as embodying the one who has it. They are two different frequencies, two different lives, two different selves. So let me speak directly to that hidden place in you, the one that feels tired of trying, tired of hoping, tired of feeling like you're almost there, but never quite arriving. You're not broken. You're not unlucky. You're not blocked in the way you think. You're simply identified with a version of yourself that money does not recognize. Money responds to identity resonance. And right now you've been sending out signals from the self, who is trying to become wealthy, instead of the self for whom wealth is already natural. This is the gap we begin to close today, not by pushing, not by asking, not by convincing yourself of anything, but by copying, yes, copying the inner posture of the one who already has what you seek. You may not realize how powerful this is yet, but consider this. Your subconscious mind, the quiet space beneath your thoughts, doesn't respond to desire. It responds to familiarity, to what feels normal, to what feels like you. Joe Dispenza explains that when you rehearse a future self with enough emotional truth, your brain and body begin to mirror that identity. Biology shifts, chemistry shifts, behavior shifts, your responses to life shift, and suddenly, opportunities that never saw you before begin to recognize you. Not because the world changed, but because you stopped approaching money as a visitor and began approaching it as a resident of your inner world. So let this video be more than information. Let it be an initiation, a gentle crossing from the self who hopes into the self who knows, from the self who performs imaginary rituals into the one who inhabits the end state with quiet authority. You are not here to learn how to get money. You are here to remember the version of you for whom money is simply the natural reflection of inner alignment. This is the essence of the copy principle. You will not create the wealthy version of you. You will embody the one who already exists within consciousness, waiting for you to step into it. Take another breath. Let your shoulders drop slightly. Feel the subtle shift in your chest as you soften into this present moment. Because from here on, the journey is inward. Every word in this video guides you deeper into the emotional blueprint of your end state. Every insight helps dissolve the identity that kept you waiting. Every practice anchors you into the quiet truth that money arrives where it feels expected, not desired. This is the beginning of your return, not to a future, but to the self already living in the end. Let us walk into that identity together. There is a subtle tension that lives beneath every desire for financial freedom, a quiet pull between what you want and who you believe yourself to be. Most people never see this gap because it doesn't appear in the numbers, it doesn't appear in the bank balance, and it doesn't even appear in your daily routine. It appears in the invisible posture you hold when you think about money, a shrinking of the chest, a tightening of the jaw, a slight drop in the breath. And in that small, nearly imperceptible reaction, the subconscious reveals its hidden truth. You crave ease, but you still identify as the one who must earn, justify, or fight for every bit of support life gives you. This is not failure. This is conditioning. And the moment you recognize it, the identity begins to loosen. There is a difference between wanting money and feeling like someone for whom money naturally arrives. This difference is not intellectual, it is emotional. It is rooted in the way you learn to see yourself long before you tried to manifest anything. If somewhere inside you still hold the belief that you must prove your worth, the universe reflects that belief through situations that force you to prove it. If you carry the internal expectation that money must be hard, distant, or inconsistent, life rearranges itself to match that expectation. The Galatea effect tells us that the results you allow are shaped by the image you hold of yourself, not the effort you put forth. And when you look closely, you may notice that the gap is not between you and money. It is between you and the version of you who already feels deserving of it. This gap expresses itself in predictable ways. You may do everything right on the outside and still feel like something keeps pulling you back. You may have moments of inspiration followed by the same old hesitation. You may feel almost there, but somehow not quite able to cross the threshold. This isn't because the manifestation isn't working. It's because the identity behind the manifestation hasn't shifted. Your financial reality does not reflect your potential. It reflects your self-concept. And until that inner reference point updates, the outer world cannot stabilize into the wealth you're asking for. So we begin with something small, something quiet enough that your nervous system doesn't resist it. One behavior, one decision, one microscopic shift that belongs to your financially confident self. Not the grand version, not the future fantasy, but the grounded, ordinary version of you who moves through life with ease around money. Imagine that version for a moment. How do they approach a bill? How do they speak to themselves about spending? How do they breathe when checking their balance? Choose one of these scenes and simply copy it. Not to pretend, not to force, but to let your system experience a new normal in one place where the stakes are low. As this tiny shift becomes familiar, your identity begins to stretch. Like the string of an instrument being tuned, it moves slowly into alignment. When the string is slack, strumming it harder doesn't produce harmony. It only produces noise. In the same way, no amount of hustling, visualizing, or hoping can compensate for an identity that hasn't yet learned the tone of wealth. The harmony comes from alignment, not effort. You are not trying to become someone new. You are meeting the version of you who has been waiting on the other side of this identity gap, ready to show you how natural abundance feels when it is no longer something you chase, but something you are. There comes a point in every spiritual journey where you realize that effort alone cannot carry you into a new reality. You push, you plan, you organize, you optimize, and yet something still feels misaligned beneath the surface. Not because you are doing things incorrectly, but because you are doing them from the same identity that has always carried the weight. When Neville spoke of the end state, he was pointing to a truth that lives far deeper than action. The world reshapes itself around the identity you hold as real. Most people try to improve their financial situation through productivity, through discipline, through constant motion. But money does not respond to movement. It responds to expectation, to inner certainty, to the quiet, unwavering sense that the outcome is already written. If you listen carefully, you can feel the difference between effort and assumption inside your own body. Effort carries tension. It carries the silent belief that the result is still uncertain. The breath shortens, the mind tries to monitor everything, and the heart feels like it is walking toward a finish line that keeps moving further away. But assumption feels different. Assumption relaxes the shoulders. It widens the breath. It brings a soft clarity into your chest. Assumption is the inner knowing that what you desire has already occurred in consciousness, and the physical world is simply catching up. This is not passivity. This is alignment with the blueprint that governs your entire energetic field. Neuroscience confirms this in a language the modern mind can understand. The brain is constantly predicting, constantly anticipating, constantly choosing based on what it believes is most likely to happen. These neural expectancy pathways influence your behavior long before you consciously decide anything. If your brain expects financial struggle, it filters reality through that expectation. If it expects stability, it searches for and acts upon cues that match stability. Desire alone cannot override this mechanism. Only identity can. Only the assumption of the end is strong enough to rewrite the brain's predictions. This is why money follows your expectation, not your effort. The inner posture you hold determines the signals your nervous system sends into your environment. If your body still carries the old financial narrative, fear, urgency, doubt, no amount of action can anchor you into wealth. But when your inner atmosphere changes, even slightly, your behaviors, opportunities, and decisions start to reorganize themselves around that new emotional baseline. You begin to choose differently. You hesitate less. You recognize openings you once overlooked. You thrive where you previously defended yourself, all because the expectation shifted before the action did. There is a simple, powerful way to begin stabilizing this expectation. Create a single imaginal snapshot that represents the completion of your financial desire. Not a complex scene, not a long story, but a single moment that feels like unmistakable evidence of the end. A bank notification, a tax document showing a number you once believed was out of reach, a moment of booking a trip without calculating fear. Let this single image become your anchor. When you revisit it, you are not hoping. You are remembering. You are letting your nervous system experience a future so familiar that it stops feeling like the future at all. And once this image becomes emotionally real, your relationship with the process changes entirely. You no longer panic when something goes wrong. You no longer cling to signs. You no longer chase outcomes. You already know the ending. And just like watching a movie whose conclusion you've memorized, the middle no longer confuses you. The twists don't destabilize you. The delays don't discourage you. You are grounded in the completion, and that completion becomes the quiet force that calls everything into alignment. This is the essence of living in the end state. It is not fantasy. It is the blueprint of consciousness, and your body and your reality are designed to follow it. There is an exhaustion that forms when you spend your life trying to become someone new. It feels like you are always climbing, always fixing, always reaching for the version of yourself you imagine lives somewhere in the future. And the more you try to reach that version, the further it seems to move away from you. Not because it is distant, but because the very act of trying reinforces the belief that you are not already aligned with it. This is the hidden weight behind most attempts at manifestation. You believe you must build your wealthy self from the ground up, as if you are crafting a completely different identity. But every attempt to become something new quietly declares that you are not it now. And that declaration is what keeps the outcome at arm's length. Neville and the mystics before him pointed to a radically different truth. The version of you who lives in the end already exists, not metaphorically, not symbolically. It exists as a fully formed blueprint within consciousness, the same way an ideal form exists in Plato's philosophy. There is a version of you who already breathes differently around money, who makes decisions from calm, not fear, who receives instead of chases. This self is not a fantasy. It is a possibility within the field of identity. And possibilities become realities the moment you inhabit them. You are not trying to create a wealthy identity. You are stepping into the one that has always been waiting for you to recognize it. This is the pattern break that allows true transformation to occur. As long as you are striving to become, you remain in the vibration of incompleteness. But when you choose to copy the inner tone of the self who already exists, you bypass the struggle entirely. Copying is not pretending. It is resonance. It is alignment. It is the act of feeling, behaving, and perceiving from the state that already contains your desire. You do not need to manufacture confidence. You borrow it from the version of you who already feels it. You do not need to generate calm. You tune into the self who lives with it as a baseline. The moment you reference that identity, your nervous system begins adjusting itself, and your external world follows. There is a simple but profound shift that accelerates this process. For a single day, refuse to consult your current financial identity. Every decision, every response, every emotional interpretation is made from the perspective of the self who already attained the level of abundance you seek. You don't force this version, you reference it. You feel for its presence the way you would feel for light in a dark room. What would that version of you think in this moment? How would they respond? What would they dismiss? What would they embrace? For these 24 hours, you are not trying to grow into them. You are copying their consciousness, their posture, their quiet certainty. When you do this, something remarkable happens. You realize that this wealthy self is not a distant dream. It is a selection. Like choosing a character in a video game, you are simply stepping into a different configuration of identity. You're not building it. You're not earning it. You are choosing it. And once chosen, the world begins responding as if you have always been that version. Opportunities appear that didn't match your old identity. Conversations shift. Decisions feel lighter. And slowly, your environment begins to mirror the truth you finally agreed to inhabit, that the wealthy self is not something you become. It is someone you allow yourself to be. Pause for a moment and notice this shift inside you. If this awakening feels real, subscribe now and stay connected to the identity that already lives in the end. There are moments when you try to imagine the life you want, yet something inside you tightens before the vision even forms. It feels like a sudden interruption, an inner pull downward, a heaviness that makes it difficult to access the emotional clarity Neville spoke of. This is not resistance in the dramatic sense. It is simply the body remembering its history. Scarcity leaves traces. It teaches your system to stay alert, to anticipate loss, to prepare for disappointment before hope can settle in. And without realizing it, you begin to approach your desires from a place of tension rather than openness. Scarcity creates urgency, and urgency collapses imagination. You cannot feel the end state of wealth while your body is still bracing for impact. This is why financial manifestation often feels blocked, even when your mind is full of spiritual knowledge. You may know the law, you may understand the teachings, you may practice visualization, but if your nervous system is still wired for unpredictability, your imagination becomes unstable. Neuroscience describes how inconsistent financial experiences activate the reward-panic cycle, a pattern where hope and fear fire in rapid succession. Dopamine surges in anticipation, then drops sharply when uncertainty appears. The system becomes addicted to expecting chaos. And in this state, trying to imagine abundance feels like trying to steady a flickering flame in the middle of a storm. You're not lacking discipline. Your body is simply stuck in survival mode. This is the true obstacle, not scarcity itself, but the emotional noise it creates. Scarcity hijacks your inner world by making fear feel more familiar than possibility. When the mind is noisy, the imaginal faculty becomes faint. When the heart is tense, the end state becomes distant. When the breath is shallow, the future feels heavy. Scarcity doesn't block money. It blocks your ability to feel the version of you who already has it. And without the feeling, the identity cannot form. Without the identity, the reality cannot stabilize. This is why so many people think the law isn't working for them. The law is perfect. It is the emotional environment that needs tending. Before the end state can be felt, the inner atmosphere must soften. This is not about forcing calm or pretending you feel safe. It is about allowing your body to settle enough to make room for imagination. Slow exhalations, grounded awareness, and gentle presence shift your physiology from vigilance to receptivity. And receptivity is the gateway to identity. When your nervous system quiets, even slightly, the imaginal self becomes accessible again. You begin to feel the possibility of wealth instead of only imagining it. You begin to recognize that the version of you who feels complete is not far away. It has simply been drowned out by noise. Think of it like trying to paint on a canvas that won't stop shaking. No matter how skilled you are, no matter how beautiful the image in your mind is, the picture cannot take form until the surface becomes still. When the shaking stops, even for a moment, the colors can finally hold. The end state can finally land. And in that stillness, the wealthy identity that once felt unreachable begins to feel like home. Scarcity may have shaped your past, but it does not define your blueprint. The moment your inner world steadies, the imagination takes the lead, and the end becomes easier to feel than the fear. This is where the shift begins, where the body unclenches, the mind opens, and the wealthy self finally has space to emerge. There is a reason so many people visualize abundance, yet continue to feel stuck. They imagine the numbers, the scenarios, the lifestyle, but they do not imagine the emotional posture of someone for whom wealth is already normal. And without that posture, the subconscious cannot accept the vision as truth. It only accepts what feels familiar. When you picture money with the emotional tone of fear or urgency, the body memorizes the fear, not the abundance. This is why the outer world remains unchanged, no matter how vivid the visualization may seem. Humans learn through emotional modeling long before they understand logic. You absorb the emotional states of the people around you as a child, calm, tension, doubt, confidence, without needing explanations. The nervous system naturally copies what it observes. This is the essence of the copy me now method. You are not copying a lifestyle. You are copying the inner atmosphere of someone who lives in alignment with prosperity, someone whose decisions are not directed by fear, someone whose breath naturally deepens when they think about money, someone for whom receiving is as instinctive as exhaling. Begin by sensing the emotional tone of such a person, real or imagined. Not their habits, not their possessions, but their rhythm, their steadiness, their quiet certainty. Feel how they move through moments that would once have triggered you. Notice the absence of urgency, the absence of negotiation. Let that emotional posture settle into you like a faint, steady echo. Even if you feel only a fragment of it, the body begins recognizing a new blueprint. And once the emotional environment stabilizes, identity shifts with it. This is not pretending. It is resonance. Just as you learn a dance by absorbing its rhythm before mastering the steps, you learn abundance by absorbing its tone before witnessing its form. And the moment that tone becomes natural, quiet, grounded, unquestioned, the external world begins reorganizing itself around the self who feels fulfilled before anything arrives. There is a moment in the manifestation journey when you realize that the pictures you create in your mind are not enough. You can see the lifestyle, visualize the numbers, rehearse the scenes, yet something in you still feels unchanged. And that feeling becomes the true signal. People often imagine abundance while carrying the emotional residue of fear, urgency, or uncertainty. The subconscious does not respond to the image. It responds to the emotional climate beneath it. When the feeling contradicts the vision, the body continues reinforcing the state of lack, even when the mind attempts to rise above it. This is why Neville emphasized feeling as the secret. The feeling establishes the inner architecture. The visualization only fills in its details. Neuroscience echoes this truth. The brain encodes new realities through repeated emotional environments, not through logic. Each time you feel an emotion, neural pathways strengthen around it. If you repeatedly feel worry while imagining wealth, worry becomes the blueprint. But if you repeatedly feel the tone of completion, even softly, even briefly, the nervous system begins memorizing that new internal reality. To access that tone, you must move towards simplicity. Instead of trying to force a strong emotion, identify one word that captures the essence of financial completion, a word that reflects the inner sensation of already having enough, a word that settles into the body like a gentle weight. Settled, steady, assured. Choose the one that resonates like truth rather than aspiration. Let that word shape the way your breath moves, the way your chest expands, the way your inner world quiets for a moment. As you hold that word, the feeling tone begins forming from within. Not a dramatic rush, but a subtle alignment, an inner coherence between your breath, your posture, and your expectation. And in that coherence, the wealthy identity starts to anchor itself. It becomes easier to imagine abundance because you are no longer imagining against the grain of fear. You are imagining from a place of inner steadiness. Like the bass line of a song that holds the entire composition together, this feeling tone becomes the foundation. And once the foundation is secure, money can finally respond to the self who feels the end, not the self who only pictures it. There comes a point on this path where understanding is no longer enough. You can study the teachings, repeat the principles, and absorb the philosophy, yet still feel an invisible distance between what you know and what you live. This distance remains because many people hold a quiet fear of their own power. They want money, but they hesitate to confront the possibility that the law is real. If it works, everything changes. If it doesn't, they fear the disappointment. And so they remain in the middle, aware of the truth but afraid to lean into it fully. This hesitancy is not a flaw. It is the human instinct to avoid uncertainty. But the law responds to conviction, not caution. You gain real confidence not by studying the principles, but by witnessing the principles move through your life. Self-determination theory describes how autonomy and mastery emerge through lived experience. When you allow yourself even a brief experiment with the law, you begin to discover the quiet pattern beneath your reality, how your assumptions subtly guide events, how your inner dialogue shapes outcomes. how your emotional tone becomes the atmosphere through which opportunities find you. The key is to begin in a way that feels emotionally safe. When the mind is not overwhelmed, resistance softens. Imagine receiving a small, unexpected financial benefit within a short window of time, not because you are testing the universe, but because you are observing yourself. Notice the shifts within you as you hold that expectation, the flickers of doubt, the rising hope, the sudden attempts to control the outcome. These internal movements reveal precisely where your identity still contracts around money. And here is where the transformation begins. Each time you witness even the smallest confirmation, the old narrative loses power. The gap between belief and embodiment narrows. You start to feel the truth of Neville's words, not as an idea but as lived reality. Testing the law is not about proving anything to the world. It is about proving to yourself that you were never separate from the creative process. The more you engage with it, the more the wealthy identity stabilizes, until eventually the question is no longer whether the law works, but how deeply you are willing to trust the self who uses it. There comes a moment in your evolution when the idea of wealth stops feeling like a distant possibility and begins to feel like a natural expression of who you are. Not because anything dramatic has changed in the outer world, but because something subtle and profound has shifted within you. Most people unconsciously identify with struggle because it mirrors their history. It feels familiar. It feels predictable. Even if it is painful, it carries the comfort of known territory. And yet, beneath that familiar identity, there exists another version of you, quieter, steadier, untouched by fear, who recognizes abundance as the more truthful expression of your being. This identity shift is not about forcing confidence or pretending everything is fine. It emerges from the gentle recognition that your past no longer dictates your inner posture. The Pygmalion effect teaches that your expectations shape your outcomes, but the deeper truth is that your expectations are shaped by your self-image. When you begin to expect more from life, not as hope, but as a natural consequence of who you are becoming, the world mirrors that expectation effortlessly. The external changes feel almost secondary because the internal foundation has already been laid. To anchor this new normal, you do not need grand gestures. Identity recalibration happens through symbolism, through the quiet moments when you choose differently than before. A small upgrade, a shift in posture when you think about money, a decision made from calm rather than caution. These micro-expressions signal to your subconscious that the old identity is fading. Each subtle action whispers, "This is who I am now." And slowly, the nervous system begins aligning with this new baseline. The transformation resembles moving into a new home. At first, the space feels unfamiliar, as though you are still half living in the old place. But then you place one object down, a lamp, a book, a piece of art, and suddenly the room begins to claim you. With each small addition, the new space becomes yours. In the same way as you embody the identity of someone for whom wealth is natural, the emotional atmosphere around you shifts. Being prosperous starts to feel more authentic than being restricted. The new version of you stops feeling like an aspiration and becomes the only version that makes sense. Eventually, the idea of struggling feels foreign, almost impossible to inhabit. Not because the world changed overnight, but because you no longer recognize yourself in the older patterns. Prosperity becomes your resting state, safety becomes your language, and wealth stops being something you manifest and becomes something you simply live. Everything you've heard leads back to one truth. Money responds to identity, not effort. When you rest in the end state, you dissolve the tension that once kept abundance at a distance. Neville taught that the assumption of the fulfilled desire is creation itself, and you can feel now how your inner posture has shifted toward that reality. As the future becomes emotionally richer than the past, the nervous system accepts the new identity as home. Wealth is no longer something you pursue. It is something you receive because you finally match the version of you who already lives in completion.